Non-voting members, only the parties can vote. They invited observers, NGOs, tax experts, and the media. This COP had 85,000 people there. So how can 193 members end up with 85,000 people? Well, each of the member countries can bring as large a delegation as they want. The United States had 770. The Chinese smaller countries had less. But when you add all those up, and you add up the non-voting attendees, you get a very large conference. One of the biggest things that I had to do is I've had a long history of doing energy in the United States, some overseas, but mostly in the United States with my focus. You get over there and you have to reorient yourself. So look at the global situation. The global situation is totally different than what's going on in the United States.
Tom, just 1 second. Let me get our audio. I think it's got the wrong micro. Okay, try that, Tom.
Try what?
Just keep talking.
All right. Well, I was going.
Okay.
The United States contingent was led by John Kerry, who is President Biden's envoy to climate, and Kamala Harris. And I would say this wasn't John Kerry's first rodeo, and he was an amazing person there, and he was very influential in a lot of things that were done. There were heads of 33 states. The King Charles was there. The Pope was supposed to come, but he got sick. There are just a variety of heads of all these. Each delegation had some kind of head that was important in their government. Plus, you had all sorts of important hangers-on. All right. Just as an example, well, I should back up and say one thing. This is full disclosure. I was selected as an observer by the American Nuclear Society. Some people may find that contentious, I understand that, but I will tell you what my bias is. Climate change is real, and it's coming on like gangbusters, and we're hanging on by our fingernails to try to meet our goals. And so my bias is I don't care what technology helps. My only bias is that it has to work and work within the plan for the country's energy. It has to be you have to be able to get it online enough to do a change by 2050, which is one of our big goals, and you have to be able to afford it. So I don't care wind, solar, nuclear, hydro. I'm agnostic as far as technology goes. Anyway, some background. You may have heard of the Kyoto Protocol. This came out of COP3. This is where the UN actually tried to do something. UN issues a lot of papers and stuff like that, but they really try to do anything. With COP3, they try to do something. They said for the Annex 1 countries, those are the most developed nations, we're going to ask you to reduce your emissions to below the 1990 levels. This is 1997, so it's like 7 years later. And to do that, we're going to have 2 5-year reporting periods. In the first reporting period, 2008, 2012, all 41 made their goals because it was easy. The first reporting period, you just had to have a plan and a few other things. So it was all 41 countries made the first reporting period. The second reporting period was hard. You actually had to reduce your emissions below 1990 before the end of the period. It became obvious for almost all 41 countries they weren't going to do it. So they started pulling out. And then there was contention about what are we going to do with the former Soviet Union countries, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's like 2014, the Kyoto Protocol was dead. It was replaced by the Paris Agreement, or Accords, if you're French. I like Accords. And science had progressed to the point where they could give us some goals. And they gave us 2 goals. One was a temperature goal, and the other was an emission goal. They said if you could limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, that's above the pre-industrial levels, but no more than 2 degrees centigrade, not that you would avoid global warming, but you would limit the major effects of global warming. And so this was the temperature goal. To meet that goal, all parties, that's all the countries, had to be net zero by 2050. As part of this protocol, all parties have to submit a voluntary plan and goal called National Determined Contribution, NDC. So the beginning of this, all the countries, the parties, submitted NDCs. And every 5 years, there is a big scorecard, a review of everything that's happened, looking at all the NDCs, what's going on, and then what do we do next? And then they call that the global stock take. This is UN speak. The first global stock take was COP28, and that's why it was so important, because it was first all getting together and seeing if it's working and what we need to do to if it's not, and so forth. And also part of the accord, just the developed countries are supposed to give money to the less developed countries. Okay. The first bone of contention is why Dubai? This was a big thing. United Arab Emirates is the 9th largest oil producing country in the world. And the big thing in the criticism was, why give an oil producing country the host of the climate change? Well, how do you get to be host? You get to be host just like the World Cup. You bid on it. And you get 3 years ahead of time, you get chosen. So 3 years ago, Dubai got chosen. And so they were just savage about, these people are just going to greenwash it. The host is going to make sure that nothing comes out of this that is going to affect their oil revenues and so forth. And that kind of resonated with me. They also said, all these signs, go wind, go solar, and all this other stuff that they've set up for the conference. As soon as the conference is over, those will go in the trash can and they'll never see anything with renewable energy out of Dubai. I got over there and I'm an engineer and I'm kind of analytical and I work on data. And I changed my mind. I was 360 degrees, 180 degrees, I'm sorry. Anyway, United Arab Emirates was formed in 1971. It's the Confederation of 7 Emirates. 7 more Emirates. And each emirate has an independent government, and there is an overall government, but each emirate is in some states their own rule. United Emirates has a lot of oil, but Dubai doesn't. It's Abu Dhabi that's got all the oil. In the 1960s, late 1960s, they discovered oil in Dubai. And the good news and bad news, they said the good news is we got oil, the bad news is not much of it. But they had a very smart person in charge of Dubai. Oops. Sheikh Rashid bin Zayed Al Maktoum. He took the oil money and he decided to use it instead of just giving it to his relatives and, spending it on whatever the relatives want to spend on. He decided that he was going to build an economy in Dubai that could survive after the oil revenues ran out. And so he started all these big infrastructure projects, all these energy projects, all these things in banking and finance and so forth. And his family complained, and the constituents complained, say, no, just give us the money. We did, He came up with this famous quote. My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I drive a Mercedes. My son drives a Land Rover. His son will drive a Land Rover. His son will ride a camel. The point being, if we don't do something smart with this oil money now, in 2 generations, we'll be back riding camels. And at that time, Dubai was like this most inhospitable, nothing place in the middle of the desert, had a little port, and a fishing port and some pearl diving, but it was like a nothing. Because of this man, what he did, and his sons that followed, they were successful. The picture you see on the upper left, this is Dubai. This is Dubai in 1991. The oil revenues are just starting. I'm sorry, 1996. This is Dubai in 1991. This is Dubai today. They have this incredible economy, and the oil's gone. For them anyway, not for Abu Dhabi, but for them. They set up an economy that's based on technology, tourism, manufacturing, finance, banking, on and on and on. Anything but the oil revenues. What's the point? The point is, if these guys are only 2 generations from riding camels in the desert, and they could do it, the United States is the largest oil producing nation in the world. And if we meet 2050 net zero, we're going to have to wean ourselves off oil revenues. So if they can do it, we can do it. Now, we're not going to do it exactly like them. You know, I mean, they do cater to wealth and a few other things you might criticize them for, but they were able to do it because they had inspired leadership, minimal corruption, and stability. Now, the other charge that they were going to just throw all these renewable energy stuff in the trash, they couldn't have been more wrong on that one also. Whoops. Their sons who took over after the Sheikh died in 1990, the older son took over, and after he died, the younger son is now ruling. They got into high tech and to continue their father's idea of getting an economy that doesn't depend on oil. Not only did they do high tech, they jumped into renewable energy. And they didn't do this, and this more than 20 years ago, they didn't do this just for this conference. They have 4 operating nuclear power plants. All right, it's not renewable, but it is carbon free. They have the biggest solar park in the world. It goes to the horizon. They've platted out 30 square miles. Now, it's not 30 square miles yet, but it could expand to that. In addition, they have this solar tower that heats up molten salt, and they use the heat at night to produce power. They have these thermal troughs that do the same thing. They're finishing up a pump storage facility, another 250 megawatts. It also be a storage. So you've got the base load nuclear, you got the solar. There's no wind there, by the way. There's just hardly any wind at all. So wind is not a factor. In addition to which, they have a sovereign wealth fund called the Dubai Holding Company. It has billions of dollars, and it has to invest only in green projects. They're decarbonizing their heavy industry. They have a law now that every building, that's a building, not necessarily a home, but a bigger building, has to have solar panels on it by 2030. That's not new buildings, that's all buildings. So the charge that they're just going to forget about renewable energy after this conference is just not true. I had to admire them. This little thing over here is not a little thing. That's they're big in electric vehicles. All their police cars are electric. All the little motorboats that control the little inlets and whatever are electric. This is an electric heavy duty truck. And what it is, it's not for out on the highway, it's for the port. The port is the biggest port in all the Mideast. And it's designed to move the shipping containers around. So they're in a process now of taking this vehicle and manufacturing it and supplanting 900 diesel powered vehicles. So there's an old saying, well, we say it, I don't know, somebody says it. You can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? I came back from Dubai and say, these guys can walk the walk. Okay, let's get the bad news. This is the bad news. Let's get it all out on the front. This is bad news. And again, you've got to reorient yourself from the United States to globally. Chick, I believe in one of his presentations, showed a similar graph. This is the graph of emissions, CO2 emissions from select countries. 15 years ago, United States and China were about the same place, giving out 6 billion tons a year. Since that time, the United States has dropped over 1 billion tons. We're now below 5 billion tons a year. How do we do it? 2 ways. Wind and solar, that's 1, renewable energy, and 2, closing coal plants and substituting natural gas plants. Which was the most important? They're both about even. I actually did the calculation in preparation for this to see which one. The gas thing has got a little bit of an edge, but as things go forward, the other wind and solar probably were more important. In the same time we did that, we dropped 1 billion tons. China added 6 billion tons. Everything we have done, and India is doing something similar. Everything we've done, India and China have overridden. Emissions are not going down. They're going worldwide. They're going up. Now, China can say, hey, you United States are per capita emit more than we do. And that's true. But within a few years, that won't be true. They will take over that mantle. China can also say, hey, you United States, you are, if you look at historic emissions going back to 1850 or something, you have emitted more than we have, which is also true. But within less than 15 years, if this continues, and all signs are it will, they will take over that mantle. So it's good news and bad news. The really terrible moral crowns will go to China. The bad news is this is going to seriously affect our ability to get in climate change program going. China has more renewable energy than any country in the world, but it also has about half all the coal plants in the world. The problem is the coal plants. The United States, on average, shuts a coal plant down every 3 weeks. In those same 3 weeks, China builds 6 more. Why? Well, China, being a communist country, has these 5-year plans, and the 5-year plans call for growth, growth, growth. And the one thing they know how to do is build coal plants. And so they have some renewable energy, but their overwhelming energy strategy is coal. China says we're not even going to meet 2050. We're going to shoot for 2060. India says we're not even going to meet 2060. We're going to shoot for 2070. So when you think about it, if we have to be net, the goal is to be net zero by 2050, but 2 of the 3 biggest emitters say we're not even going to do 2050. It shows you how the situation we're in. This is the reality. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is the electricity production by the world. Again, you got to look at the global thing. Look, coal is king. It's coal, coal, coal all around the world. Coal is the worst emitter. Coal puts out 2.3 times more than natural gas would put out per unit of electricity produced. And then the second is natural gas, and then hydropower. Hydropower is still growing. United States hydropower is flat. We've lost our appetite for big dams or whatever, but worldwide, it is one of the biggest renewable energies. Nuclear is flat. That's going to go up a little bit. Wind and solar are coming up, and they'll bypass nuclear at some point in time. I don't have any problem with that. You know, we're not in competition. The whole idea is to get as much energy that's non-carbon producing as possible. You know, but with that kind of growth in coal, you see the problem. Let's just look at the United States for comparison. Just to look, we're shutting down coal plants. Here's coal. Now gas is going up, nuclear is flat, wind and hydropower are going up, but I'm sorry, hydropower is flat, wind and solar are going up. So you look at this, and you know we're all familiar, kind of, with what's going on in the United States, but globally is a totally different situation. And like I said, the Earth doesn't care who emits or who doesn't emit or what technology is used. All the Earth cares about is the total carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. I think Chick showed it similar, of course. All the thing, you know, we keep talking about how wind and solar have made these remarkable growth, you know, and they have. They've done wonderful things. I mean, you know, but they get a very high percentage of growth every year. But where's the dip in CO2 concentration? There is no dip. There's no 2 years where the CO2 concentration went down. Every year it's gone up. We're now at 424 parts per million and rising. And the slope is increasing. So again, this is reality. Here's the last bad news. Well, some little minor. Here's the last really bad news. 2023. It was the hottest year since the Pleistocene. Like I said, I'm a paleontologist. We're in the Holocene, by the way, and the Pleistocene came before us. You have to go back more than 100,000 years to find something as hot as 2023. Now, it was helped by the strong El Nino, and that might drop a little bit. But this is what they're 1.38 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. This is by Copernicus. Copernicus is the official United Nations weather and climate change people, and they're also the European Union one. And there's some other organizations that issue temperatures, and they have different models or whatever, but this is the official one. We're gonna blow past 1.5 degrees. I mean, we're almost there. Whoops, I did not change it. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not change it. We're almost at 1.5. It was originally, I couldn't find anyone at the conference that could tell me that we were confident about 1.5 degrees. Nobody. It's still in the United Nations documents and everything, and you can see it's in their stock take and everything. But very, very few people believe it's 1.5 degrees is possible. They were talking about 2 degrees, and then people over there talking about 2.5 degrees. So if you think 2023 was warm, where do you see at 2.5 degrees instead of less than 1.5? So this is reality. And here's a quote. The last half year has truly been shocking. Scientists are running out of adjectives to describe this. This is the Copernicus deputy director. That's the official United Nations and European Union organization. So that's the bad news. But it's reality. And so let's talk some good news. Loss and damage fund. The Paris Accord set up something called a loss and damage fund, but it wasn't actually set up. It was just said that it had to be set up. Right away at this conference, almost the first day, the loss and damage fund was set up. It was the first day, even less than the first day. Basically, what this is rich countries will give to poor countries money so they can, there's 2 things. There's adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation means to make climate change less. Adaptation means to adapt to the effect. This is for adaptation for the small countries. There was a contingent of 30 some odd island countries there that were really vociferous in their lobbying, and they have to be. The seas are rising 3.6 millimeters a year and rising and increasing. That's over by the end of the century, we'll be over, the seas will be over a foot higher. You say, well, what's a foot? But to the island countries, I mean, you talk about like the Marshall Islands, Gilbert Islands, Solomon Islands, they don't have many feet. Look at Kiribati. It's got 100,000 people. It's in the Gilbert Islands, and it's got 100,000 people on it. And the highest point on it is 6 feet over high tide. The loss and damage fund, the first country to give to it was Dubai. They gave $100 million to it. They can walk the walk. Followed by Spain, France, Germany, and Italy. But by the time the conference was over, $790 million had been pledged, but that'll grow because nobody expected it to be up and ready for at this conference. And so a lot of countries came without considering what they could pledge. United States gave 17 million. That's pretty paltry, and there was no reasoning why, but the speculation was China. China says we're not a fully developed country, and so we can't be asked to give to this fund. In fact, we can take money out of this fund. Well, I'll tell you, if China tries to take money out of this fund, there'll be such an uproar, this whole thing will fall apart. But even it's going to grow, but even that is a small amount. There's probably, for these small island nations, especially the low-lying atolls, whatever, there's not enough money in the world, especially with all this coal burning. It's that you're going to be able to adapt to the rising sea levels. I mean, I think a lot of them, and are going to be toast. But you don't have to go to the Pacific Islands. There's an island in Chesapeake Bay, Tangiers. It's been occupied since the 1600s, and now half of it, because of the rising level, is now no longer habitable. There's Aleutian Islands, that already the government is moving Native American villages off the seacoast. So it's, anyway, there's not a lot. The good news is we have a loss and damage fund. The bad news for some of these low-lying island countries, it's not going to be enough. Okay, finance. Joe Biden was a hero there. People grab me and say, oh, you're an American. We love Joe Biden. And they're talking about the IRA. Now, the IRA is going to cost us $800 billion over 10 years, and half of that's for renewable energy. People really were saying, oh, we wish the European Union would do it. We wish our country would do it and everything. He was a real hero there. If the election, and if you could have the European Union people vote in our coming election, Biden would have a big chance. Anyway, the finance issues became so contentious, so complex, and whatever, they finally decided in this conference to punt it back a year. So the finance issues, meaning what we're going to give to less developed countries, will be addressed next year in COP 29. $3.5 billion was added to the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is not different from the loss and damage fund. It's a fund that was set up by the Paris Accords, and that it's a combination of industrial, private sector money and government money, and it's more like loans and guarantees and other things to get for less developed countries to have, a green project or something. Kamala Harris announced that at the COP that the United States would add another $3.5 billion to the climate fund. The original goal was 100 billion. It's counting everything that even the ones they've spent, it's about 30 billion now. So how much do we actually need? The IEA is an International Energy Agency. They estimate we need $4.5 trillion per year for transition. What do they mean by transition? Transition is not only do you have to spend the money on wind and solar or whatever, but you have to spend the money on the infrastructure. If you're going to have all wind and solar on your grid, you need to upgrade your grid. Well, how much do we spend now on what we call the transition money? This is by Bloomberg, and they're a pretty respected financial firm. They say now, 2023, this is both government and the private industry. We're spending about $1.8 trillion a year on what they call transition. Now, like for example, transition includes not only wind and solar, it also includes money for the power grids, for electrified, the transportation and so on. So in theory, to make 2050, we're going to have to, this is globally, by the way, not United States. We're going to have to increase our funding in this area by about a factor of 2.5. I asked at one of these finance group meetings, is there enough money in the capital markets to get $4.5 trillion a year? And I was assured there was. But this guy took me aside, and he was a consultant for the finance ministers of Africa. Specifically, he was consulting for Namibia at that time. And he says, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how much of that money are you going to send south? And I said, what do you mean south? He says, well, look at Africa. Look at sub-Saharan Africa. So that night back in the hotel, I looked at sub-Saharan Africa. And, I looked at what's the situation in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has 33 of the 46 countries that the UN say is less developed. 600 million people in Africa have no electricity. We're not talking about bad electricity, not talking about unreliable electricity. They have no electricity. There's no grid in most of sub-Saharan Africa. Some of the bigger countries like South Africa and whatever have a grid, or some towns, a large town have a single power plant. But 600 million people have zero electricity. So if you're going to, and they get their energy from coal, oil, and bagasse. Bagasse is what's left over in the fields after the harvest. And so if we're going to make 2050, you got to do something for these guys. You got to build an entire grid. Now, it's one thing to spend money in your own country, but now you're going to have to spend money in some of these little countries that most of our people in the United States have never heard of, and that's going to take a certain amount of political will. So again, you see, I'm just trying to paint the realistic picture here. This is what it is. All right, there were 7 different pledges at the conference. This is the first pledge, the renewable energy pledge. 130 countries said we were going to triple our renewable energy by 2030. And we're going to double energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the amount of energy it takes to produce 1 unit of GDP. The less energy it takes to produce that unit, the more efficient you are. I asked someone from Wood Mackenzie, which is another big consulting firm, is this possible? And he said, yes, it is. It's going to be hard to do, but it is possible. Interesting, there's 130 countries signed this. 2 did not, India and China. China was very upfront, and I appreciate this. They say, we're going to triple renewable energy by 2030. That's not the problem. We can't double the energy efficiency because we were already so invested in heavy industry. We're already flat on energy efficiency. And so I thought that was, an upfront statement. They say we're going to do one, but we can't do the other. But tripling renewable energy by 2030 is a good, achievable goal, but it's going to be hard. And so and 130 countries pledged to do this. Okay, let's talk about nuclear. You knew it was coming. net zero nuclear industry, 25 countries vowed to triple nuclear capacity by 2050. This pledge was led by the United States. I've had a lot of experience in the nuclear industry. And of course, as you might imagine, since I was sponsored by the American Nuclear Society, I worked on 29 different nuclear power plants in 5 different countries. They stopped building them and then they went on to other things, everything from nuclear to solar to fuel cells to biomass, whatever. Let's look at the big picture here. There's 440 nuclear plants in operation in 32 countries, 61 under construction, 111 planned, and 337 proposed. Now, if you take all these that are under construction, plan, and proposed, and assume they all become in operation, and you add them to the 440, it still doesn't make triple. Now, in the United States, the last 2 nuclear full power plant projects were kind of disastrous. Georgia Power, the Vogtle units, they came online, but they cost twice as much as planned, and they took twice as long to build. But at least they're up and running, and 40 years will be no carbon energy from them. The South Carolina project was an absolute disaster, and I don't know really why, but after a couple $1 billion, they just pulled the plug in. So no full-size nuclear power plant is going to be built in the United States in the foreseeable future. What everybody was banking on, and everybody else in this operation, the big buzzword was SMR, small modular reactors. This is a small 50 to 300 megawatt. That's small by nuclear size. And you build it in like a factory. And then you ship it to where you're going to put it, and you build the buildings around it. And this concept has been around for more than a decade or so. And there's about 15 companies that have designs and whatnot and around the world, but nobody's buying yet. And my inner self feels, if I was a betting man, that some countries are going to build this. I mean, there'll be some countries that'll invest some money in it to do it, but SMRs I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. And I don't think the triple nuclear power thing is going to come to fruition. But I'm not infallible on predicting the future. Somebody once told me, we used to do a lot of proposals in New York City, and we'd ship them to, how to get them to the government on time. If there's a government proposal by 1 minute, it's gone. So we always had to make sure it got there on time. Somebody told me there's this new company, and they're going to take packages from all around the United States and fly them to Memphis, resort them, and then fly them back again to their destination. And I said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. And of course, you know, it's Federal Express. And anyway, so I'm not perfect about predicting the future. But anyway, global power, nuclear power is going to go up globally, be flat in the United States. It'll come down slightly as they start taking off plants. I don't mind that, so long as what I do mind is if you shut down a nuclear power plant and you replace it with fossil fuel. I talked to a student there, and he was a student in California, and he started as an activist, a movement to keep the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California online. And it was supposed to shut down. And the thing grew and grew and grew. And finally, Governor Newsom, who, is a liberal kind of governor, he saw the writing on the wall. California's got the worst grid in the entire United States for stability and reliability. Why? It's got to do with renewable energy. What it has to do with, in 1990, California stopped building power plants in California. They started building all their plants outside of California because you couldn't get anything done in California. 30% of California's electricity comes from out of state. You got a tie line from the south that brings in the nuclear power from the Palo Verde plants, which California owns half of them. They want to shut down the one in California, but not the one in Arizona. They get a tie line from Nevada, which has a lot of solar on it. The big problem is the tie line from the north. You got a little nuke, you got some coal, you got some, hydropower and everything, but the line is overstressed. You come on a hot July or August night, and that northern tie line can't keep up, and that's the big problem. And so now you want to shut down a plant that's produces low carbon energy on a regular basis, and your grid is just about on its last legs. And so reality came in, and Diablo Canyon has now been extended. Some other countries have done something similar and have regretted it. I met the delegate from the German parliament. Gee, you meet all these guys. It's really great, and women. It's really great. And I chided him about shutting down our nuclear plants after Chernobyl. And he said, yeah. He said, but you have to understand, when you rule, govern, you have a social contract. And at that time, the Green Party was transcendent, and we had to give them something, and that's what we gave them. And he said, even the Green Party now thinks maybe it was a mistake because we replaced it with coal and natural gas, and the natural gas coming from Russia. He said, but the Green Party in their charter constitution has no nuclear, and so they can't admit it. But there are other countries that have, like Japan shut down all their nuclear plants after Fukushima. They now turn 9 back on, and they have 11 in the queue, so they're going to at least 20 more, and probably more than that. They'll eventually turn on most of them back on. But anyway, so my thought is, I don't care what you build, but don't turn off something unless you can replace it with other renewable power. Okay, the pledges. Let's keep on the pledges here. Methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas. Everybody's been talking about it. The United States measures it now with satellites and stuff, and so we really know about it. But we can't do anything about it. Why can't we do anything about it? Well, it's between the courts and the Congress. The EPA can't do anything about methane. Methane comes from the drilling. It comes from the process. It comes from the pipelines. It comes from your house, from your stove, if you have a gas stove. But it's not, there's no authority to, in the United States and many other countries, there's nothing on the books to regulate methane. And so, but anyway, 155 countries said they're going to reduce their methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And that's a good thing. This is the first time anybody's come up and says, we've been talking about it, but let's actually do something. Along with that, a guy named Darren Woods is the CEO of ExxonMobil. It's the first time a CEO from an oil company attended this. And he came with this little thing in his back pocket, because he knows he's the same problem everybody's, picking on the oil companies and methane, et cetera. He got 50 oil companies to pledge that they would zero out upstream methane. Upstream means before they send it to you. If you leak, that's on you. But they will zero out upstream emissions by 2030. I'm sorry, this is the 50 oil companies. The zero out upstream, that is a big pledge. I mean, that's really something, because the government and the nobody else right now in the United States can do anything about this. And most of the world is the same. Everybody's crying about methane emissions, but nobody is doing anything. And so this is actually a big thing now. Now, Mr. Woods is in a little bit of hot water, because he said part of the global warming problem is the consumers. We could have had carbon tax years ago and the consumers wouldn't have it. And so everybody's saying, well, you're blaming us, not you. But anyway, that is a good thing. All right, cooling. All right, we get air conditioning is the biggest use of electricity, and it's what destabilizes the California grid. Anyway, this is 70 countries say they're going to reduce cooling emissions by 68% by 2050. My thought on this is, wait a minute, if you reduce it 68% by 2050, we're supposed to be net zero by 2050. So what about the other 32%? So you're saying we're not going to be net zero? It almost reads like that. And anyway, this is a nice pledge, and increasing the air conditioners by efficiency by 50%. That's a nice pledge too, but the way the pledge actually reads, it almost it doesn't make sense if we're shooting for 2050. But maybe people are decide we're not shooting for 2050 anymore. Industrial accelerator, okay, 35 companies, whatever, catalyze decarbonization in heavy industry by green hydrogen, carbon capture, storage, and whatever. What does this catalyze? What does that mean? There's no numbers, there's no date or anything up there. What does it mean? What are they looking for? Here's what they're looking for. If in the global stock take that disappears and the UN blesses it, what they're looking for is a United Nations blessing. If the United Nations bless carbon capture and green hydrogen, then it helps them, because then it becomes by fiat almost helping climate change. And so therefore, they can get financed. A lot of banks and other places can only have funds that you can only loan to green projects. And by definition, if the United Nations blesses carbon capture, or whatever, all of a sudden that becomes a green project. You get credit, depending on what country you're in, for what you're doing for global warming. So they're looking here for United Nations blessing. All right, here's another one about hydrogen. The same thing. Work towards. What is work towards? There's no number or anything here. But the same thing. They're looking for renewable and low carbon hydrogen certification schemes. There's 20 or more different things you can do to make hydrogen in a low carbon, scheme, or you can take low carbon hydrogen and make anything from ammonia to, petrochemicals, it's so forth. They're looking for the same thing. They're looking for a blessing. If it's appears in the global stock take, then it opens all sorts of financing and carbon credits and other things for them. Okay. Marine fuels. Right now, we produce about a million tons of low emission marine fuels. That's by using hydrogen or whatever. And they're pledging to increase that by a factor of 10 by 2030. That's still only a fraction of what we use in marine fuels. But again, these are good things. This is a funny one. Battery Energy Storage Consortium. Why is it funny? First, this Battery Energy Storage Consortium consists of India and 10 little countries. And there are little countries like Mauritania and Namibia and a bunch of countries in Africa. Right away you say, what is this? Anyway, they're pledging to deploy 5 gigawatts of battery energy storage by the end of 2024. As you read the details, they say we're going to get commitments for 5 gigawatts that actually won't be online until 2027. But what's the weird part about this? We already have more than 5 gigawatts. We have now about 60 gigawatts of battery energy storage around the world. So what are they actually pledging? And I guess what they're pledging is saying, hey, we're this little group and we want to get going and we'll add, some more gigawatts to this. And this is a good thing. But this is a kind of a weird pledge, and I don't really get it. Now they ask the question, well, let's say we're over 1,000 gigs by 2050. Is that enough? And I tried to do the calculations the other night, and it's just too complicated. The big problem is, if you build a solar plant, you tell me I'm going to build a megawatt of solar. I know how much energy that's going to produce approximately. Solar's got a capacity factor of about 25%. The nameplate capacity, it produces the equivalent of that 25% of the time. Well, because the sun's not up all the time and whatever, and it gets lower and and any other kind of plant, coal or gas or whatever, I know the approximate capacity factor for that fuel. Nuclear is the top. The nuclear is over 90% worldwide because you run them base load continually. The gas plants and others are, down in between. So how do you know if this is enough? Well, first, the reason you don't know enough is the problem with energy storage. I mean, I asked if some of you people were, anybody an engineer here? Kilowatts, megawatts, gigawatts is a unit of power. It's not a unit of energy. So the key, when you talk about energy storage, power is important because you have to know how much power you can draw. But the key is how much energy is stored there. So now we're putting in these cargo container size lithium ion battery things. You've seen pictures of them, whatever. And they're rated like 1 megawatt. But it's 1 megawatt for how long? It turns out the first ones we put in were for 45 minutes. So it's 1 megawatt for 45 minutes. Now we're now up to an hour and a half as we put in better ones. And as time goes on, they're talking about having them run as long as 4 hours. So when you see this, 945 gigawatts, how much energy is in that? And you don't know unless you know how long they run. Plus, to decide if it's enough, right now, 95% of electricity storage is by pump hydro. And, 5% by battery energy, but battery energy is gonna rise up to that. Question is, how, for pump storage, what's the average amount of energy in a pump storage facility? I mean, whatever its nameplate rating is, like if you got a gigawatt of pump storage, how much actually energy is that? How long does it run? On average in the world, it's about 40 hours. So on one hand, you got less than 4 hours. On the other hand, you have 40 hours. So you have to, there's an adjustment here about capacity factors. Anyway, but you also have to look at the grid. It got very, very complicated and I had to give up on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, my girlfriend says I should give up on it. Yeah, all right. All right. Okay. Outcome of the first global stock take. The first draft was disastrous, absolutely disastrous. All sorts of countries were going to walk. They said, that's it, we're walking. See this picture up here? It's hard to see in this thing, but that woman is one of the delegates from the Marshall Islanders, and she's crying. It was all sorts of companies said the whole thing was going to fall apart. After all 2 weeks, it was going to fall apart. And they decided that they kept pushing and pushing them. And the last couple of days, they decided to extend the conference another day. And you're talking about keeping, really high level people an extra day, And so they fought, it was a knife fight. And you had Saudi Arabia and China on one group, and you had the European Union, the United States, and a few other countries on the other. And they just, it was duking out. You see these people here, they got, all the little things they're reading with the little yellow things on it. Drafts were coming out every hour or whatever. And this is John Kerry. John Kerry was a real force to be reckoned with down there. And he's got his meeting and people are going over whatever the latest is. Anyway, and actually the Sultan Al Jaber, who was the living in caves guy, he actually came up and he actually saved the days somewhat. And he got people to stay and to do something productive. They finally issued something that everybody, if not liked, could live with. Here's the draft. This is the 196 very finely tuned paragraphs that are worded to, so everybody can find something in that paragraph they like. Well, here's just a subparagraph. And I have the stock take. If anybody wants to see it or even take it, you can find it online. But anyway, what we need to do, reducing both consumption and production of fossil fuels in a just, orderly, equitable manner, so as to achieve net zero by, before, or around 2050. Reducing. The other people wanted phase out of fossil fuels, and never mind about around 2050. They wanted 2050. So this was the first draft, and people, like I said, it was a knife fight, and they came up with the final. What a lot of people wanted was phase out. The word phase out. They did not get phase out, but they got transition away from fossil fuel energy systems in a just, orderly, equitable manner, accelerating action in this critical decade so as to achieve net zero by 2050, no around. So you see, you say, well, this is wordsmithing. Yes, it is. But this is how the United Nations work with 194 countries, 195 countries that have totally different outlooks and agendas and whatnot. Anyway, here's a couple other things that's in the stock take now. Coal had nobody there nobody was there to speak for coal. And everybody recognizes coal's the problem. We won't stop global warming with coal. We didn't get phased out, but we got to get phased down of unabated coal power. And in the 196 paragraphs, it doesn't say anything good about coal. Here's another one: accelerating zero and low emission technologies include, renewables, nuclear, abatement and removal technologies, carbon capture, and hard to abate section of low carbon hydrogen production. So those people this is the blessing. Nuclear got blessed, carbon capture got blessed, and the low carbon hydrogen production got blessed. And this is, remember what I said, the people were looking for a blessing so they could be legitimate as far as getting access to financing and other things. This is what they wanted and what they needed to do. And so I asked, I said, well, too bad, what about hydropower? And the guys looked at me and says, well, hydropower is renewable. There are people who don't think hydropower is renewable. And, but the United States thinks it's renewable. Your UN thinks it's renewable. Just about everybody, you know, in the world thinks it's renewable. Except a lot of things we produce in the United States, we put a little asterisk, and it talks about renewable. And the asterisk can go down and say either includes hydropower or doesn't include hydropower. But anyway, so the guy said, we didn't need to put hydropower in, it's already in there. All right, here's some quotes. These quotes, I think, really help sum it all up. Beginning of the end of fossil fuel era, the United Nations press release. That's probably, you know, kind of a stretch. Humanity has finally done what is long, long overdue. The European Union Commissioner for Climate. Please help me, show me for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socio-economic development, unless you want to take the world back into caves. This is Sultan Al-Jaber, who was the presiding president of this thing. And he got goaded into saying that by Mary Robinson, the former Ireland president. They're scared. I think they're worried. She, in a press conference, goaded him, got him really mad, and that's when he said that. So, you know, he's probably not used to having to answer in press conferences. Yeah, to women, right? Fossil fuel finally faced a reckoning in UN climate negotiation of 3 decades of dodging the spotlight. The historic outcome marks the beginning and the end of fossil fuel. World Resources Institute. Again, this is probably a stretch, but this is better than anything the United Nations or any other global organization has ever issued. Okay, here I like the Guardian. Good cop, bad cop, weak words and litany of loopholes. It's true, there are weak words and there are loopholes, and that is the, you know, it weakens what the UN is trying to do. But if you read the 196 paragraphs and you go through all it is the most comprehensive and the most forward statement the United Nations has ever issued. So like I said, there's good news and bad news. And so anyway, COP29 is going to be in Baku. Now, a few of you probably don't know where Baku is. Matter of fact, does anybody here know where Baku is? It's the capital of Azerbaijan. And I've thrown my hat in the ring for it. You know, right now they're in a war with Armenia and stuff. So, but that is going to be the COP where they're going to tackle all the financial issues and how much, you know, rich countries should give to the poor countries and how they should do it and so forth.